Religion. It's a huge topic, right? A force that has built empires and started wars. In this explainer, we're going to look at it through the lens of a new science, a framework that claims to offer a path toward harmony and progress. And it all starts with one central puzzle. So here's the big question we're tackling today. How can the exact same thing, religion, be this incredible source of civilization, art, and community, and at the same time, the cause of so much devastation and conflict? While the framework we're exploring says the answer isn't in history or sociology, but actually inside our own minds.
All right, let's get into the diagnosis. According to this science, to really get a grip on something as big as religion, we first have to look inward. We have to understand a fundamental, physiological process that's happening inside the human brain.
And here's the core idea. This science argues that religion isn't just some cultural thing we invented. No, it's a natural product of our biology. It's a direct output of what it calls the human thinking function. It's something our brains are literally built to do.
And it gets even more specific. The mechanism at work is called the belief function. Think of it as a built-in tool our minds use for macro exploration, which is just a fancy way of saying we are biologically wired to ask the big questions. You know, where did we come from? Is there a creator? What's our ultimate destiny? It basically means we are all philosophers by nature. The experts behind this science really emphasize this point. They say this biological drive to understand the universe is proof of how incredible humanity is. But that brings up a really important question, doesn't it? If our minds are hardwired for this kind of noble pursuit, where does all the ugliness and conflict come from? And that question brings us to the next piece of this theory. To understand how that noble function can get twisted into a tool for control, we have to talk about something this science calls humanity's childhood. So the idea here is that for most of our history, humanity has been in a kind of intellectual childhood. Our amazing thinking function was working, sure, but it was sort of on autopilot. We were using it without really being aware of how it was working. And this is where we come to a fork in the road. When our belief function starts exploring those big questions, it can go one of two ways. If you combine imagination and reasoning with actual factual proof, you get scientific knowledge. But if you take away that factual proof, you're left with just imagination and reasoning. You're left with a theory that resonates, that feels right. And that, this science argues, is the origin of religious belief.
But it's not just the ideas that make these groups so powerful and long-lasting. It's the community they create. The theory calls this the attraction of micro-society life. It's that powerful sense of belonging, of being part of something, that holds the whole thing together.
Okay, and this is where the analysis gets really critical. The argument is that these micro-societies, because they're based on that immature belief function, always end up creating systems of control. And look at the specific words used here. They harvest dignity and extract gratitude. This isn't just about community anymore. It's about a power structure.
So how does this actually happen to a person? Well, the theory lays it out pretty clearly. First, you join the group. Then, you're encouraged to trade your own self-respect and self-love for the group's identity. The result, it claims, is a drop in what's called your humanity quotient, which slowly pushes you toward a state of servility.
So, if humanity is stuck in this childhood, how do we grow up? What's the path to maturity? Well, the framework does offer a solution, and it involves a massive shift in how we all think. Now, this next point is a big one. It's pretty radical, actually. The argument is that all of our major social structures, not just religions, but political parties, even the very concept of nations, were created during this immature phase. And because of that, they all have these built-in, damaging childhood attributes. So what does that mean? Well, if you follow that logic, it means that trying to fix these systems from the inside is pretty much pointless. All the arguments, the reforms, the improvements, it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The fundamental design of the ship is the problem. So what's the answer? A huge cognitive upgrade for our entire species. For humanity to finally exit childhood and mature, this science says we need a critical mass. And that number is, well, it's huge, 90%. A full 90% of the world's population would need to achieve a mature, healthy thinking function. But imagine if we could do it. What would that world look like? The theory promises something incredible. A society where peace and harmony aren't forced by laws, but just happen, naturally. A world where progress isn't a struggle, but our default state.
And that brings us to the final part of this explainer, a challenge for you. We've laid out the core concepts of this science. Now it's your turn to think about what it all means, starting with two really important questions.
So, first, let's think about the real world. Could today's existing institutions, our religions, our political parties, our nations actually accept and use this science? A science that says they were built on a childhood foundation? What do you think? Why would they? Or why wouldn't they?
And that leads us to the final question, which is really all about you. If these groups do resist, if they try to block this science so they can hang on to power, to keep harvesting dignity, as the theory says, then what? What can you, as one individual who understands this perspective, possibly do?